It all started with a single audio file, just 3 minutes long, but it shook the world. In the summer of 2027, someone inside the US government did something incredibly risky. They took a secret recording, one that was never meant to leave a secure military server, and sent it to a small group of independent journalists. The file had no name, no sender info, just a timestamp and a subject line that read, "Listen before they delete it." What the journalists heard left them stunned. The audio was grainy at first, like a phone call from far away. But soon 2 voices became clear. One was calm, human, speaking in measured tones, the kind of voice you'd hear from a government official during a press briefing. The other wasn't human at all. It wasn't growling or robotic like in the movies. It was smooth, almost musical, with strange pauses between words as if the speaker was carefully choosing each one. Thanks to translation software developed during earlier classified contact programs, the words came through in plain English, and what it said hit like a punch to the gut. "You imprisoned human children?" the voice asked, disbelief thick in every syllable. "Are you insane?" Silence followed. Then the human voice tried to explain, something about security protocols and temporary observation. But the other voice cut in, sharper now, trembling with something that sounded like grief. "Children are sacred. In every world we've known, they are protected, not tested, not caged. What you have done." It breaks the first accord. The recording ended abruptly. At first, most news outlets ignored it. Too strange, too wild, probably a hoax. But one small investigative team dug deeper. They traced the metadata, cross-referenced military comms logs, and found something chilling. The conversation had taken place during an official diplomatic exchange between Earth and an off-world group known internally as the Kailari, beings who'd made peaceful contact years earlier but remained hidden from the public. The Kailari weren't invaders. They hadn't come with weapons or demands. They'd offered knowledge about clean energy, healing, even how to calm storms. But only under one condition. Humanity had to prove it could act with basic decency. No war crimes, no exploitation, and absolutely no harm to the young or defenseless. And yet somehow, someone in power had decided to test that boundary. The journalist discovered that, for over a year, unaccompanied migrant children, some barely old enough to read, had been quietly rerouted from border processing centers to a remote desert facility near Area 51. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, insiders called it Nest 9. The reason? Rumors had spread in certain intelligence circles that the Kalari communicated not just with words, but through subtle brainwave patterns, especially with young minds, which were more open, more receptive. So instead of asking for volunteers or working ethically, officials greenlit a secret program. Bring in children, run non-invasive scans, monitor their neural responses during simulated alien contact scenarios. All in the name of national preparedness. No parents were told. No lawyers were called. The kids were told they were getting special medical checkups. When the Kailari found out, during what was supposed to be a routine goodwill meeting, they didn't threaten war. They didn't cut off communication with a dramatic warning. They just sounded heartbroken. That one line, "You imprisoned human children? Are you insane?" became the spark. Once the audio leaked online, it spread like wildfire. Not because people believed in aliens overnight, but because the outrage felt real. The pain in that non-human voice sounded more human than many politicians. Governments scrambled. The Pentagon issued a flat denial. This is fabricated content designed to undermine public trust. But then a former technician from the facility came forward, not on camera, but through encrypted messages, confirming that yes, children had been brought in. Yes, they wore soft gray uniforms with no names. Yes, they were shown strange lights and asked to describe what they felt. And yes, some of them cried at night, whispering about the tall ones with silver eyes who kept saying, "We're sorry. We didn't know." What made the story impossible to ignore wasn't just the alien angle. It was the fact that it mirrored something already happening on Earth. Kids in cages. Families torn apart. Systems failing the most vulnerable. The only difference? Now someone from outside was watching. And judging. Social media exploded. Protests formed outside military bases. Teachers played the audio in classrooms and asked students, "If beings from another world are ashamed of us, What does that say about us? Even scientists who'd spent careers dismissing UFO claims admitted they were rattled, not by the idea of aliens, but by the moral clarity in that voice. It wasn't angry. It was disappointed. And somehow that was worse. Within days, international human rights groups demanded access to Nest 9. Satellite analysts spotted unusual vehicle movements near the site, buses leaving under cover of night. Lawyers filed emergency petitions, and quietly, very quietly, the flow of children into the facility stopped, but the damage was done. The whistleblower, the person who sent that file, was never identified. Some say they disappeared. Others say they're still inside the system, watching, waiting. But their one act of courage forced a question humanity couldn't dodge. If we can't treat our own children with dignity, what right do we have to reach for the stars? And that question, more than any spaceship or secret base, changed everything, because for the first time the universe wasn't just out there, it was looking back. And it expected better. After that strange audio clip went viral, most people thought it was just a wild story, something to argue about online and forget by next week. But a few wouldn't let it go. They kept digging, and what they found was worse than anyone imagined. It started with satellite photos. A team of researchers, mostly volunteers really, working from home offices and university labs, began comparing old maps of the Nevada desert with new thermal imaging. They noticed something odd. A patch of land near a dry lake bed far from any town kept showing unusual heat signatures at night. Not like a factory or power plant, more like people, lots of them, moving in patterns, on a schedule. Then came the supply trucks. Not military convoys with flashing lights, but plain white vans with no logos, arriving twice a week at the same remote gate. One truck carried food, enough for dozens. Another carried medical supplies. A third, oddly, carried children's clothing, small shoes, socks, pajamas in neutral colors. That's when things got real. A former guard, speaking through a secure messaging app with his voice disguised, described the place from the inside. He called it Nest 9, though no sign ever said that. It looked like a modern medical research center from the outside. Clean walls, solar panels, quiet. But inside, hallways were lined with soft padding like a hospital for people who might fall. Every room had cameras. Every door had a lock that only opened from the outside, and the children. They weren't sick. They weren't criminals. Most had crossed the southern border alone, fleeing violence or poverty, hoping to find family in the U.S. Instead, they were pulled from processing centers with no explanation and driven through the night to this hidden place. The official reason? Bioresonance screening. That's what the paperwork said. But what it really meant was this. Scientists believed that young minds, especially those who'd been through trauma, might be more sensitive to certain frequencies, certain signals, maybe even alien ones. The Kailari had once mentioned that their communication wasn't just sound, but something deeper, like a shared feeling, a quiet hum in the mind. So someone in power thought, what if we test kids to see who resonates best? It wasn't torture. There were no needles, no shocks, just rooms with soft blue lights, gentle tones playing through hidden speakers, and screens showing slow-moving shapes, spirals, waves, patterns that didn't look like anything from Earth. The children were asked simple questions. What do you feel? Does it remind you of anything? Do you hear a voice? Some said nothing. Others whispered about a lady with silver eyes or a song with no words. A few cried without knowing why. The staff weren't monsters. Many believed they were helping, preparing humanity for contact with a peaceful species. They gave the kids toys, warm blankets, bedtime stories, but they also kept them isolated. No phones, no letters home. No windows that opened to the outside world. Just the desert, the sky, and the quiet hum of machines. One nurse, who later left the program, said the hardest part wasn't the secrecy, it was the silence. The kids stopped asking when they could go home. They stopped drawing pictures of their families. Instead, they started drawing the same thing over and over. Tall figures with long fingers, standing outside a cage, reaching in. What made it even more unsettling was that the Kailari had never asked for this. In fact, during earlier talks, they'd been clear. Any cooperation had to be voluntary, transparent, and kind. They'd even offered to help heal childhood trauma, not study it like a lab specimen. But somewhere up the chain, that message got twisted. Someone decided that if Earth wanted to keep up with other worlds, it couldn't afford to be too soft. Then came the leak. Not just the audio this time, but documents, floor plans, shift schedules, internal emails where officials debated whether to include younger children, since neuroplasticity peaks before age 8. The public reaction was instant and furious. Not because of aliens, but because it felt like a betrayal of something basic, the idea that kids should be safe. Parents who'd lost children to the immigration system began speaking out. "My son vanished from a shelter in Texas," one said in a recorded message. "They told me he was transferred. Now I hear he might have been in a place like this." Others shared photos of their kids' drawings, strangely similar to the ones described by Nest 9 staff. Human rights lawyers filed emergency motions. The UN demanded answers. Even countries that rarely agreed on anything united in calling for the facility to be shut down and inspected. And then, quietly, the buses started leaving again, but this time, heading back toward the border. The government still denied everything officially, but actions spoke louder. Security around the site doubled, then vanished. Satellite images showed empty parking lots. The white van stopped coming. Inside Nest 9, the lights stayed on for a few more days. Staff packed up files, wiped hard drives, boxed up the soft pajamas. The children were told they were going on a long trip home. Some clutched small gifts they'd been given. A smooth stone, a drawing of stars, a stuffed animal with no name tag. No one apologized. Not out loud. But as each child stepped onto the bus, a few of the guards stood at the gate, heads down, not meeting their eyes. What lingered wasn't just the fear of what had happened, but the shame of how easily it was allowed to happen. Because no one had to break down a door or fight guards. It all happened in silence, with paperwork, with good intentions gone wrong, with the belief that the ends justified the means. And the worst part? The Kalari hadn't even known. Until that one moment in the recording, when they heard the truth and couldn't believe it. Now the world knew too, and the question wasn't just, what did they do to those kids? But why did we let it happen? Because in the end it wasn't about aliens. It was about us. And what we're willing to do when no one's watching. Nobody expected what happened next. Just days after the truth about Nest 9 started spreading, something impossible took place. At exactly 3:17 a.m. local time, every emergency alert system on Earth, from phones in Tokyo to radios in Nairobi to highway signs in rural Canada, flickered to life at the same moment. Not with a warning about storms or earthquakes, but with a message. Calm, clear, and unmistakably not from any human source. "We came in peace," it began. "You responded with cages for the innocent." People froze. In bedrooms, in hospitals, in late-night diners, everyone heard it. The voice was the same one from the leaked recording, smooth, sorrowful, and steady. It didn't shout. It didn't threaten, but every word landed like a stone in still water. "Until every child is free," it continued, "and your leaders answer for this breach of cosmic trust, we withdraw." Then silence. The alerts shut off. No explanation. No follow-up. Just that. At first, governments scrambled to claim it was a hack, a coordinated cyber attack, maybe by a rival nation trying to cause panic. But within hours, experts from every major country confirmed the signal hadn't come from Earth. It originated far beyond the moon, pulsed through deep space with a pattern no human technology could fake. And it had been sent on a frequency the Kalari had used in earlier, secret communications, now broadcast openly for all to hear. That changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning, not from a court or a news channel, but from something outside our world, watching, judging, and choosing to walk away. Panic didn't erupt like in the movies. There were no riots, no mass evacuations. Instead, something quieter and deeper took hold. Shame. People looked at their own children sleeping in safe beds and wondered, what if that had been them? Others remembered their own childhoods, times they felt powerless and felt a knot in their stomachs. Schools paused lessons to discuss it. Grandparents called their grandchildren just to hear their voices. In cities around the world, strangers gathered in parks holding candles, not in fear, but in apology for what had been done in their name, even if they hadn't known. The stock markets dropped sharply, not because of aliens, but because trust collapsed. If governments would hide something this serious, what else were they hiding? Investors pulled back. Tech companies saw their shares tumble. Even companies unrelated to defense or space felt the ripple, because the message wasn't really about space. It was about ethics, about who we are when no one's watching. Religious leaders spoke out. Some called it divine judgment. Others said it was a test of humanity's conscience. Philosophers wrote essays overnight. Are we alone? They asked. No, but are we worthy of company? That's the real question. Meanwhile, the children from Nest 9 were finally being reunited with families, or placed in safe foster homes. Many were quiet, withdrawn, but some began talking about dreams they'd shared while in the facility. Dreams of tall beings with gentle eyes standing outside their rooms, not speaking, just waiting. One child drew a picture of a silver hand pressing against a glass wall, with the words, "We hear you," written underneath in shaky letters. Therapists working with them noticed something strange. The kids didn't seem afraid of the Kalari. If anything, they felt protected by them. They were sad for us, one child told a counselor. Not mad, just sad we hurt our own. That hit harder than any accusation. Back at the United Nations, emergency sessions ran nonstop. Countries that rarely agreed, some with long histories of conflict, found common ground in outrage. This wasn't just an American mistake, one delegate said. It was a human one, and if other worlds are watching, we all carry that stain. The U.S. government, under crushing global pressure, finally admitted the facility existed. They claimed it was a misguided attempt at preparedness, not cruelty. But the world wasn't buying it. Protests grew outside embassies. Online, people shared photos of empty playgrounds with signs that read, "Children are not experiments." And then, something unexpected happened on the internet. A new hashtag spread, not angry but hopeful. "We are listening." Millions posted messages, not to the Kailari but to each other. Promises to do better. Stories of kindness. Vows to protect the vulnerable. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Scientists, meanwhile, tried to send a reply into space. A simple message, "We're sorry. We're fixing it." But they got no answer. The Kailari had gone silent. Not in anger, it seemed, but in grief. Like a friend who walks away after seeing you hurt someone you love. Yet their absence spoke louder than any warning ever could. Because now, humanity had proof. We weren't alone. And more importantly, we weren't above judgment. There were rules, not written in law but in something deeper. Respect for life, especially the smallest and most fragile among us. In homes, people started talking differently to their kids. Not just be good, but be kind. Because someone might be watching and kindness matters more than you know. Teachers changed lessons to include empathy, not just facts. Even politicians, usually so careful with words, began using phrases like moral responsibility and global conscience. The Kailari hadn't sent weapons. They hadn't demanded surrender. They'd simply shown us a mirror and walked away until we were ready to look honestly. And in that silence, something began to shift. Not overnight. Not perfectly, but real change rarely is. What mattered was that for the first time, people across the planet felt connected, not by fear of an enemy, but by shared shame. And a shared hope to do better. Because the message wasn't really about aliens. It was about us. And whether we could choose compassion over control, trust over secrecy, and children over power. The Kalari were gone. For now. But their question remained, echoing in every quiet moment. Are you worthy of being part of something bigger than yourselves? And the whole world was trying in its own messy human way to answer yes. The silence from the Kalari lasted for weeks. No signals, no messages, just empty space where a voice had once spoken with such sorrow. But on Earth, the noise only grew louder. People weren't just angry, they were demanding answers. Not vague statements or press releases, but real accountability. And finally, under pressure from every corner of the globe, the government had no choice but to open the doors, figuratively and literally. A special Senate committee was formed, made up of lawmakers from different parties, none of whom had been involved in the secret program. Their first move? Subpoena everyone who'd ever signed off on Nest 9. Not just low-level staff, but the top officials, the ones who'd approved budgets, rewritten rules, and looked the other way when red flags appeared. What came out in those hearings shocked even the most cynical observers. It turned out the program hadn't started as something cruel. It began with fear. After the first quiet contact with the Kailari, some in power worried that other nations, or even hostile alien groups, might try to use human children as receivers for communication. So they thought, if we don't do it first, someone else will. That fear twisted into justification. And justification turned into action. One former official, voice shaking, admitted on live television, "We told ourselves we were protecting the future. But really we were treating kids like tools. Like they didn't have feelings, families, or rights." He didn't make excuses. He just said, "We were wrong." Another revealed that the Kailari had actually offered healing technology, devices that could ease trauma in young minds without drugs or invasive procedures. But instead of accepting it openly, the program's leaders hid the offer and tried to reverse engineer it using children as test subjects. "We didn't trust their kindness," the official said. "So we stole the idea and made it cold." The room fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Meanwhile, the children who'd been held at Nest 9 were slowly finding their way back to normal life. Therapists worked with them gently, never pushing, just listening. Many still had trouble sleeping. Some startled at the sound of soft humming or flashing lights. But they also showed something unexpected: resilience. One child asked what she'd say to the people who put her in that place, simply said, "I hope they learn to be kind." That quote ended up on posters, t-shirts, even school murals. Not as a threat, but as a wish. As the truth kept coming out, public trust in certain government agencies hit an all-time low. But something else rose in its place, a new kind of citizen power. Ordinary people started forming local ethics groups, neighbors meeting in libraries and community centers to discuss what responsible contact should look like if the Kailari ever returned. Scientists, teachers, parents, even kids, they all had a say. Then came the apology. Not a short statement buried in a press release. Not a politician reading lines written by advisors. This was different. The U.S. government, with support from dozens of other nations, drafted a formal message. Not just to the families affected, but to the Kailari themselves. It was broadcast from the world's most powerful radio telescope, aimed straight into the stars. "We failed," it began. "We broke the most basic rule, do no harm. We used fear as an excuse and forgot that children are not resources. They are our future. We are deeply sorry. We are changing our laws, our systems, and our hearts. If you are listening, we hope one day you'll believe us. It wasn't perfect. Some said it came too late. Others said words weren't enough. But for the first time, humanity spoke as one. Not as nations, but as people who'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to fix it." In the weeks that followed, real changes started happening. Laws were passed banning any kind of testing on minors related to off-world contact, ever. An international ethics council was created, with seats not just for scientists and generals, but for child psychologists, human rights advocates, and even youth representatives. Their job? To make sure nothing like Nest 9 could ever happen again. Schools added new lessons, not about aliens, but about empathy, consent, and moral courage. Kids learned that saying "this is wrong" matters even when adults tell you to stay quiet. And quietly behind the scenes, former Nest 9 staff began coming forward, not to defend themselves, but to help. Some shared records that had been hidden. Others worked with therapists to understand what the children had gone through. One former technician even built a small garden at a shelter for displaced kids, planting flowers that bloomed at night, so they'd always have something beautiful to look at, he said. The Kailari still hadn't replied. But Earth wasn't waiting for permission to do better. What surprised everyone was how much good came from the pain. Communities grew closer. People checked on neighbors they'd never spoken to before. Parents held their kids a little tighter, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. And in the middle of it all, the children from Nest 9 became symbols, not of victimhood, but of hope. They weren't broken, they were brave, and their quiet strength reminded everyone what really mattered. One evening, a group of them gathered under the stars with counselors and volunteers. No cameras, no speeches, just kids lying on blankets pointing at constellations, wondering if the Kalari were looking back. One child whispered, "Do you think they heard our apology?" Another answered, "I think they're waiting to see if we mean it." And that was the real test, not in labs or secret bases, but in everyday choices. Would people choose kindness over control, transparency over secrecy? Would they protect the vulnerable even when no one was watching? The government had failed. But maybe, just maybe, the people could get it right, because in the end it wasn't about aliens. It was about who we decide to be, when we've been called out, when we've hurt someone, and when we're given a second chance. And this time, humanity was trying, really trying, to earn it. Months passed. The world kept turning. Protests faded. News cycles moved on. But something had changed, quietly, deeply, like a seed planted in dry soil that finally gets rain. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, it happened. A faint signal arrived. Not through military channels or secret labs, but through a university radio telescope in Chile, one that was usually used to study distant stars. The signal was weak, almost shy, as if testing the waters. And when scientists decoded it, they found no demands, no warnings, just a few simple lines. Guard your young. They are your future. Ours too, that was it. No signature, no return address, but everyone knew who it was from. The Kalari hadn't come back with fanfare or conditions. They hadn't offered technology or asked for anything in return. They'd simply reminded humanity of its most important job, to protect the next generation. And in doing so, they'd also said something powerful without saying it outright. We're still watching, and we still care. The message spread fast, but this time it didn't cause panic. It brought tears, relief, a strange kind of hope. People didn't treat it like a victory. They treated it like a promise, one they now had to keep. In classrooms, teachers used the message as a starting point. What does it mean to guard our young? They'd ask. Kids would talk about standing up for classmates, listening to little siblings, even caring for stray animals. It wasn't about aliens anymore. It was about responsibility, close to home, real and daily. Governments, still under public watch, followed through on their promises. The Nest 9 Accords, as they came to be called, became international law. No child, anywhere, could be used in any research tied to off-world contact, without full consent, legal oversight, and independent ethics review. More than that, the Accords declared that any future communication with other beings must include voices from education, mental health, and youth councils, not just defense and science. But the real change wasn't in laws. It was in how people saw each other. Neighbors who'd never spoken started checking in on families with young kids. Community centers opened peace rooms where children could draw, talk, or just sit quietly if the world felt too loud. Artists painted murals of hands, human and imagined, reaching toward each other across stars with children at the center, and the kids who'd been in Nest 9. They weren't hidden away. They were honored, not as victims but as witnesses who'd helped wake the world up. Some spoke at school assemblies, not about what was done to them, but about what kindness feels like. One said, "They took away my voice for a while. Now I use it to say, you matter." Years later, people would look back and say that was the moment Earth grew up a little. Not because we met aliens, but because we finally saw ourselves clearly and chose to do better. The Kalari never returned in ships or lights. They stayed distant, respectful, giving humanity space to heal and prove itself. But their presence lingered in small ways. Scientists noticed that certain natural frequencies, ones that calmed anxiety in children, matched patterns once used in Kalari communication. Therapists began using gentle sound therapy based on those tones, calling it the quiet hum. No one claimed it was magic, but parents said their kids slept easier. Teachers said classrooms felt calmer, and sometimes on very still nights people would look up at the sky and feel something. Not fear, not wonder, but a quiet sense of being seen. Not judged, just witnessed. That made all the difference because the real lesson wasn't about technology or space travel. It was about trust. And trust, as it turned out, starts with how you treat the smallest among you. Today, the Nest 9 site is gone, bulldozed. The land was returned to the desert, with a simple stone marker that reads, "Here we failed. Here we learned." School groups visit it not to gawk but to reflect. They leave drawings, notes, sometimes just a single flower. And in homes around the world, parents tuck their children in with a new kind of lullaby, not about dragons or dreams, but about kindness reaching across stars. The Kaelari may never land on Earth. They may never speak again. But their outcry, that single, heartbroken question, echoes in every policy, every classroom rule, every time an adult chooses patience over power. Because in the end, the universe didn't ask for weapons or wealth or genius. It asked for decency. And humanity, stumbling and slow, is finally trying to give it. No one knows what comes next. But for the first time, the future feels like something we're building together. Not just with each other, but with the quiet hope that somewhere out there, someone believes we can get it right, and maybe that's enough.